Well, the provincial auditor, Tara Clement, has a warning for the government.
About 40,000 farmland transactions occur each year in Saskatchewan. We found there may be instances of farmland purchased or leased by foreign entities and not addressed by the Farmland Security Board.
And so this made us wonder, who owns most of Saskatchewan's farms? Is it big companies, foreign entrepreneurs? And why does it matter? So today on Blue Sky, we're looking at the landscape of rural Saskatchewan to find out who owns what and how that might change rural communities and the land. We'd like to hear from you today as well. If you farm, what trends are you seeing in your part of Saskatchewan? Our number is 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, to get the lay of the land, I spoke with Chad Lawley, an ag economist from the University of Manitoba. He grew up on a farm, a small farm, outside of Saskatoon, and has tracked land ownership and farm values for years. You can hear my full conversation with him on our podcast, This is Saskatchewan. But here's part of it, where I asked who owns farmland in Saskatchewan.
You know, the vast majority of farmland is owned and operated by family farms. So that's still the case. Now, those family farms are much, much larger than they used to be, and many of them would be incorporated. So, but they're still family-run operations. I think that roughly 60% of the farmland in Saskatchewan is farmed by the owner, and then 40% of the land base is rented. So the owners of those rented parcels, though, many of them would be former, retired farmers or individuals who have inherited farmland from a family member. The share of land sort of owned and operated, or owned, I should say, by large investment companies, I think is still quite small. It's maybe probably less than 5%.
What about foreign investment? Is that happening here in Saskatchewan?
I know there are always rumors about foreign ownership, but I haven't seen really good evidence that's the case. I think part of it is just that it's really hard to, as a casual observer, to sort of look at farmland titles and definitively know, the nationality of who is sort of owning that operation or that land. So I guess I don't know that there's really good evidence that foreign ownership is happening on a really in any sort of significant way.
How much of a concern is it, though, for people who live in Saskatchewan who might be farming? How big of a concern is there a fear of foreign ownership?
Yeah, certainly I think there is a fear and there's rumors about foreign ownership. I don't think that it's a big thing. I think if you look in the U.S., foreign ownership of farmland there is still very low. The province of Ontario allows foreign ownership of farmland. Even there, I believe there's not a significant amount of foreign ownership of farmland. Again, this is difficult to sort of trace, but I'm not seeing a big amount of foreign ownership, even in regions where foreign ownership is permitted.
What are your thoughts then on what the provincial auditor had to say? We may not see evidence of a lot of foreign ownership, but why would it be important to have that rigor to make sure that we know who is owning and purchasing farmland in Saskatchewan?
I mean, I think that's important. Like, I think that we have legislation in place that limits foreign ownership, and so it's important to have policies in place that allow us to track when that might be occurring and to enforce that legislation. And so I think the provincial auditor is highlighting a potentially important issue, and that you want to make sure that the legislation that's in place is being enforced. And so on the one hand, you might find that there is foreign ownership, and so steps need to be taken to correct that. And then it's also just good to have good processes in place that can ensure participants in the land market that there is no foreign ownership.
And why would foreign ownership be a concern?
So that's a good question. And we permit a lot of we permit foreign ownership in other assets. If you look at the U.S., the biggest foreign owner of land in the U.S. are Canadians, and so we're investing in other countries' farmland and forest land. Foreign ownership, though, I think there's a general feeling that you want to maintain control of the land base locally and be managing it with Canadian interests first and foremost. There was a time in Saskatchewan where farmland ownership was limited to just Saskatchewan residents. And so, one of the objectives of that type of policy was to retain farmland rents locally within Saskatchewan. We've opened that up now to Canadian residents. And so some of those farmland rents are now going outside of the provincial borders.
When was the major change in Saskatchewan? When did we start to see that shift in who owned the land?
Yeah, so in the early 1970s, Saskatchewan introduced legislation just limiting farmland ownership in Saskatchewan to Saskatchewan residents. And so that was a really somewhat unusual policy. So a lot of jurisdictions will limit foreign ownership, but allow, if you're in Manitoba, someone in Alberta or Ontario could buy Manitoba farmland. Saskatchewan took it a step further and limited it to Saskatchewan residents. And that was in the early 1970s. That legislation was relaxed in 2003. And so Saskatchewan in 2003 amended its farmland ownership legislation to allow Canadian residents to own Saskatchewan farmland. And that 2003 represents this break where now outside investors could start, Canadian investors could start buying Saskatchewan farmland. And we started to see them enter into the Saskatchewan market in around 2007, 2008. And that was a period when prospects for Saskatchewan farmland really started to improve. And so commodity prices increased. That was also a period where there were some concerns about inflation. And so I think, it didn't materialize at that time, but Saskatchewan farmland became fairly attractive for investors. They saw it as being this sort of low-priced land, and farmland is seen as a good hedge against inflation. And so investors started coming into the market around 2007, 2008.
Investors like Robert Angelic. So he actually spoke to our colleague from The Current, host Matt Galloway. Robert started investing in farmland about 14 years ago. And before that, he was involved in commercial real estate and construction. And he saw Saskatchewan farmland as an opportunity. So now he is the largest farmland owner in Canada. And most of his land is in Saskatchewan.
Before I got into farmland, I looked at all the provinces, of course, what they had to offer, well, right across Canada. Actually, I studied throughout the world, global. And at that point, Saskatchewan had some of the cheapest farmland in the world on an equal production basis. So if you're producing 50 bushels an acre, let's say canola, in the U.S., 50 bushels in Saskatchewan and Alberta or Manitoba, land should be similar price, save for some differences in freight and so on. But Saskatchewan at that time was about less than half price of Manitoba and about 1/3 of Alberta farmland. That was, of course, due to the regulations they had where you had to be a Saskatchewan resident to own Saskatchewan farmland. And then they changed it that you had to be a Canadian citizen.
And that gave you an opportunity to get in.
Well, I got in and I kind of figured that the rest of the market would figure out that it was a good deal. And so I started buying real fast and accumulating. At that time, they had a lot of listings. I'd say 4 or 5 times more than they have currently.
What sort of response did you get from people when you started buying up all this land?
Well, they thought it was crazy because they had all these memories of the 80s when the prices collapsed and everything else. And when I started buying, price of land was only $400, $500, $600 an acre. When I started paying $650, they thought it was way too much. But I knew it had to, or I didn't know, but I figured it would have to come up.
You have about, just more than 200 farmers who rent from you. and you spend a lot of time driving around the province, visiting the farmers on your land. Tell me a little bit about why that's important for you to be out with them, to see what they're doing and to see what life is like on the land that you own that they're renting from.
Well, that's very important because we talk about rotations of crops and about how to do land improvements, because most of the land, especially the eastern part of the province, doesn't lend itself very well to today's modern big equipment. So it needs some improvements, the removal of fences. Quite often there's rock piles everywhere that people left throughout the years of farming, and we bury those so there's at least less obstacles. Because you can't maneuver a 90-foot cedar the way you could a old 10, 12-footer. So today's cedars are 90 feet, and then you have the big 500 horsepower tractor up front with a cedar and the nurse wagon, so it's like a little train coming along, trying to maneuver in between all that.
You've admitted that you've turned farming in some ways on its head through those kind of practices.
Well, not really, but we are doing what we can so that my producers have the most efficient land as far as farming practices are concerned in Canada.
That's been controversial. There have been a lot of people who have said that land transformation has, for example, drained wetlands, it's killed the biodiversity around these farms, it's essentially just flattened them out so that you can have an industrial scale farm. What do you say?
That's not really true.
Well, what do you say to that?
What I'll say to that is you have a full section, let's say 1 mile by 1 mile square. Around that section is all road allowances, and they are all either trees or brush or something. The rest you farm in between. So you can never remove all that. So you do not have just everything bare. That's absolutely not true. And then there's no way that we can farm everything anyway. Out of our total 245,000 acres or thereabouts, we have 40,000 acres of green space that we can't farm. That's ravines, that's creeks, that's sloughs, that's all kinds of different obstacles that you just can't farm through. And those stay like that.
Do you think that the large operations, like the ones that you're talking about and the ones that you helped create, I mean, is that kind of the future of farming in Saskatchewan, do you think?
Well, all you have to do look at the past. Look at the past 100 years. It's all been going. We used to have a house virtually on every quarter section. Now they're, of course, much further apart, and the farms are getting bigger. I think the average size of a Saskatchewan farm is around 1,600 acres. But you have to gear your land base to your equipment. So how do you have the latest equipment, the most efficient equipment, and do only 2,000 or 5,000 acres? You have to go to that next size.
So do you think that smaller farms can make it in Saskatchewan?
Well, they can if they use proper farming business practices. Yes, there's room for everybody.
Is there still room for everybody, Chad? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think that the trends towards consolidation of farmland will continue. So when the legislation was first put in place in the 1970s, restricting ownership to Saskatchewan residents, part of the rationale for that legislation was to slow rural depopulation and to try to keep, smaller farms in business. And it probably didn't do much in that direction. Like there's just been this trend towards larger scale machinery, as he mentioned, big capital requirements. And so there are just really strong economies of scale in farming. So I think farmland consolidation is going to continue. Now, there are, I think, examples of smaller scale producers that are able to persist. And so I think there's going to be a diversity of farm sizes, but I think average farm sizes will continue to increase.
So if fewer people own larger parcels of land, what's the impact of that? I want to ask you about the impact on the environment. I want to ask you about the impact on rural communities. Maybe start with the environment. What's the potential impact on the environment?
Yeah, so I think, as machinery gets bigger, as he mentioned, you want fewer obstacles in your way on the field. And so So those obstacles might be things like wetlands or clumps of trees in lower lying areas. And so there's this incentive to, as you adopt larger machinery, to try to convert some of those to cropland. And so we do see, small wetlands being drained, and we do see trees being cleared to make room for that larger machinery. So some of that is going to be, driven because, these farms are scaling up, and so they're getting bigger machinery to do so. And so large farms are probably going to be more likely to clear that land. But I think the same sort of forces would apply to small and medium-sized farms as well. Like they're operating larger machinery, and so you want to do what you can within reason to clear things like wetlands and trees, and we do see that happening.
Chad Lawley is an ag economist at the University of Manitoba. He grew up on a small farm outside of Saskatoon. You can hear my full conversation with him on our podcast this week. This is Saskatchewan. It's on Spotify, Apple, CBC Listen, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can find that. And we're also going to play a bit more from Chad coming up, because we're going to dig into how this is affecting rural communities. And so more to come. And to tackle some of the issues that Chad brought up and to kind of deepen our understanding, we have Paige Stewart with us here in our Saskatoon studio. Paige and her spouse farm near Fillmore. They currently have 7,000 acres, and so she spends a lot of time reflecting on what's happening in rural Saskatchewan. She is in the city today for the Western Canadian Crop Production Show, and she has made some time to stop by our studio. Paige, welcome back to Blue Sky. There you go.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. Thanks, Paige. So we're going to get into a lot of different elements in this story, but I just want to ask you your initial thoughts. Like, sort of, what's the first thing that comes to mind after listening a bit there to Chad Lawley?
Well, first, Chad or Robert, I think maybe jumped out most. Mm-hmm. I love to see 50 bushel canola in Saskatchewan. Not everybody does, and it's really hit and miss. So that those economies of geography, I think he maybe missed on a little bit for part of that equation of what the value of farmland is.
That was coming from Robert Angelic.
Yeah.
Was he someone you were familiar with?
Yeah. I have
people know him, right?
Yes, I have friends that are one of rent land from him, and then I think I have friends that have lost out on land because of those type of business models. So I've privy to both. My initial reaction is I agree strongly with a lot of what Chad was saying. It's just there's just so much more context that I hope we can get to add to, because it's so nuanced in that world. There
is a lot of context to add to it. But, we're going to check in with the CBC's David Shield in a moment, but we actually have a caller on the line, and so we'll go to her first, and then we'll come back to you, Paige, okay? So Kathy joins us right now in Regina. Hi, Kathy.
Well, hello. Your conversation is so timely to a conversation with the head of small farmer, not so far away from the Fillmore area, just this week. You were asking about the size of farms, average farms, and I did hear the conversation earlier from the Robert Goller. He's very interesting to listen to, but I had to question some of the things he was saying. Anyway, this farmer was commenting about knowing of a very, very large producer in this province. He says, well, they run over 30 corporations, and truthfully, they have declared bankruptcy for some right now, but they're not worried. The conversation goes like, well, they'll just create another corporation. And then the comment came up, well, when they can't afford a year and they are running in the red, that's when you're calling crop insurance. So in fact, you're just playing the system and cropping crop insurance for income instead of anything else. And it just seems to me that some of your folks might have some comments about that. So I throw it open to you for conversation.
Okay. Kathy, thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. That was Kathy joining us in Regina. You're listening to Blue Sky. You can call us too. We're talking about farmland ownership in Saskatchewan. And our guest for the remainder of the show is Paige Stewart, who farms near Fillmore. And so we'll hear more from Paige. But if you have thoughts, give us a shout. 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. I'm Lisa Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky. Our guest today is Paige Stewart. Paige and her spouse farm near Fillmore. So Paige, I want to hear a little bit more context about you and the farm that you own, how you got into it. Tell us a bit of your story.
Well, I'm speaking as a point of privilege. I married into a successful commercial conventional farming operation. My husband had the opportunity to step into his father and mom's organization, and then some land, a neighboring family farm who didn't have a successor needed to exit the business, and they had the opportunity to purchase that. So, and then my husband and I met, and he's asked me and encouraged me to become part of the farm, and so we have a working business relationship together. I was in the industry for 15 years, and that's how we met. And so we are fortunate to have a lot of experience on the other side of the desk that we take to our farm, our corporate farm business.
And that's what you call it, a corporate farm business.
We are a corporate farm. Yeah. I hear that a lot. It feels like we're these big bad people because we have a corporate farm. It's really just a tax structure.
Right.
I hope that non-farming families or urban areas don't could see through that, we're still family, a blended family, actually, in a lot of ways, and including the men that work for us as well.
Yeah. So how big is the farm?
We're 7,000 acres. I get a little resistant to actually identifying with the size of our farm because I don't think it's reflective of what we do. I think I have, peers that feel bad about not being big enough. So I'd love to see the industry identify as how much food are we growing? How many bushels of food are we bringing to the world, or biofuel? There might be a time where we're not even producing food anymore. Right?
What do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean?
Like 2 of our crops are already being used as fuel, like ethanol as an example, right? Versus protein. So what are we? The transition of what we're doing is constant.
So just backing up a little bit, and I can understand the reluctance of talking about the size of the farm versus what you're producing, but at the same time, for people who aren't familiar with farms at all, like put 7,000 acres in context.
Yeah. I would call us a medium-sized farm, not an average, a medium-sized farm for Southeast Saskatchewan. My statistics were a little different than Robert's. My understanding of Saskatchewan farmers, the average active farmer, so you're actively farming, you're not just owning land and renting it out, is about 4,500 acres is the average farmer in Saskatchewan. And last I heard, there's about 12,000 active farmers in Saskatchewan. So, like I said, medium-sized farm, and we're able to employ 4 full-time people and some part-time. So, which is actually in context to my husband's family farm from a couple generations ago. We're the same number of people, but more than twice the number of acres.
Oh wow! Okay, and so that speaks to how that's changed. Well, efficiencies, and also how that's changing rural communities.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about those aspects in a bit. What is the price tag on some land in your area? Do you have a sense of that? Because that comes up in several conversations that I've had about rural Saskatchewan, is just what land is going for these days.
And it's, again, very geography specific. So if I gave, and I'll share some recent land transactions with you. If someone in Yorkton or Prince Albert compared that, it wouldn't even make sense because, like I said, 50 bushel canola is not realistic for us, right? That being said, we grow lentils and we can't say that they drive the bus. But from a profitability, what can I cash flow on that acre? It's just that there's no relevance, right? So I think the last transaction we heard about locally was about 3,500 an acre, within, call it 50-mile radius of our farm.
Right.
Yeah.
So that question that I put to Chad Lawley, that kind of stemmed from Robert Angelic, who is an investor. Can people get into farming these days? Like, is there still space for everyone? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think we need to add context because why does someone want to get into farming? Define ownership. I think we get really focused on ownership as who's on title, who owns that land, who owns that cow. I would want to know what's your motivation for wanting to get into farming? Do you want to be in nature? Do you want to be your own boss? Do I've met those kids that are just like, well, I want to take the whole winter off and go to Arizona like my senior partners or my grandpa and grandpa. Well, that's not realistic, right? But are there small acreages for sale where you could have a garden farm or a few cows, some chickens? I think that's really accessible for a lot of people.
And are people doing that? Are you noticing any trends in that regard?
There is a trend towards homesteading. I think people wanting a simpler life where they're in contact with their food, and they're growing their own food, and there's more community, and perhaps less devices, and that kind of thing. So
that's a trend I see on social media, and so I find
real.
that interesting. Like, is it really? It is playing out in real life. This idea of moving away from the city, growing your own food, that's a trend on social media, and you're seeing it.
Yes, absolutely. A friend of mine just down the road, he barely buys any food at the grocery store because he has a berry farm. So he has a few acres of Saskatoon berries. He milks his own goats, and he has raised his own beef. So and has a small garden, right? And he's totally self-sufficient.
Before we get to some callers, I just want you to explain the landscape from your perspective, because you've touched on a few things. So we're seeing an increase in the number of people who want to homestead, the idea that families are incorporated in farming. There were questions about foreign ownership that Chad Lawley has kind of said, well, we need robust rules, but we're not really seeing foreign actors purchasing Saskatchewan farmland. How would you describe the landscape around where you farm?
I think, again, it's the context, the words that we're using to talk about foreign funding. I want to say funding instead of ownership.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think I'm quite certain that there is foreign funding coming into some farms. What I understand is that there's a waiver that we need to sign if anyone gives us any money that isn't a Canadian resident. We have to disclose that. But it's on the honor system. The process is not there to audit and keep track of all this. So I think that's what's happening in the leakage,
right,
in the policy,
and that's why the provincial auditor has been raising this. Right. But what makes you think that there is foreign money coming into Saskatchewan like that, and is that a problem?
It's common knowledge that there are investors like a Bill Gates funding some farms that they have given the money.
Yeah, and how does that change things in rural Saskatchewan if that is the case?
Well, I'd really like to have some of this money. My farm would look a lot different. Right?
Yeah. So there's benefits.
I think we're getting less connected to the responsibility of being a farmer, being a good steward when it's not our own money. Right. So it starts to change the practices. And, I've met some farms that they just feel so bad that their equipment is as nice, or they can't grow the same crops because they're not doing as well as this neighbor beside them where everything looks really shiny. Well, they don't know that there was external funding, that changes, what things look on the back end on the bookkeeping, right? So
Paige, you're with us for the next 20 minutes, but we've got a couple people on the line who want to join the conversation. And so let's go to Lana. Lana's on the line, I think, with her husband. They farm north of Klonzie. And so I'd like to welcome you both to the show. Hi, Lana.
Hey, I'm actually Donna, and my husband did go into the store, so that
no worries.
I am very concerned with the what all your guests are saying is just does not match my reality. In our municipality of Klonzie, we were told by our councillor that the Chinese are the largest landowner in our municipality.
And how do they know that? Did they
funded? Well, I didn't ask him how they know that, because we have farmers who are trying to buy land next to their farms, next to their yards, and they are being outbid by Chinese ownership. So when a guy sells his land, we hear that the Chinese bought it. So I do not know how the municipality knows exactly who's behind the corporation's land title when it comes through, but it is our administration that is telling us the Chinese are the largest landowner in that municipality. And I kind of doubt that that's atypical. And now so what happens there is our own farmers who are family-based, who are middle-sized, are being outbid by foreign money, so that they cannot expand their farms, they cannot support their communities, because it makes it very difficult for a farmer to be profitable. And now Robert Angelic is also making it very difficult to be profitable. He wants his rent money to be higher than interest rates, so that his return on his farmland is higher than interest rates. Our young farmers cannot get into even renting land when he is expecting that much rental rate. So it's only the large farmers who can rent from him.
Donna,
and I just want to is expecting.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought. Sorry. Finish your thought.
So Angelic is expecting high yield. When one of our landlords sold out to Angelic about the time that he started buying farmland, it was sold out from under us at the beginning of May when we were ready to go in and crop it from our real owner. I mean, our former landowner. And the rental agreement for Angelic was 11 pages long. We live in hilly land. We could not, if we had a crop failure, we could not put our cattle on there to graze it.
I think the focus, Donna, is on Angelic there. The focus is on Angelic, and we're not talking about the person. There's another half of the transaction, the person who's selling the land, right? I think what I hear is
just hang on one sec, Donna. I just want to pause you for a moment. I want to hear what Paige has to say, but don't go anywhere, Donna. Stay on the line. Let's just hear. I just want to hear Paige's take on this because this is outside of my realm. So, Paige, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we have half of the transaction that's willing to sell out for the very highest dollar. Right, and then we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, saying it's important to us that these values, that this value of Saskatchewan residents or Canadian residents or the farmer that lives and works the land that can buy it. Well, then let's reassess what we're doing. Right, there's lots of senior partners or senior farmers that are looking to get out, and they're not doing their part of the work to find somebody who they could transition to and be fair to. They just want top dollar.
Donna, What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, so I've got 40-year-old sons-in-laws who would like to continue farming, and what's going to happen to them? What happens to the communities when our family can't stay farming, where our cattle land is being drained and our trees are being plowed so that they can have every last acre because they want every last acre so that they can afford the rent on the whole place. And it is just not good for as they said, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for the habitat. And it's harmful to our young people who want to even get into farming or our middle-aged ones who want to expand.
Do you have a farm succession plan, Donna? I'm curious about that. Like, have you been in touch with folks that can support that process? Like, if your children do want to take it over, do you have a farm succession plan?
Well, I have a farm succession plan, yes, but it's not. I do not farm with my son. I don't farm with my son. He farms and I farm.
I see.
So
okay.
we don't farm together.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And if you take a look at what happens, you go to the extreme of what happens when there's foreign ownership. In Maui, land is left idle because the foreign owners on the island of Maui can't get enough money or don't get enough money if they rent it out, so it sits idle. And then in the municipality of Kalonze, we also had land sitting idle when it was owned by people from, I don't remember if it was India or Pakistan, and they could not get enough money to rent. The commodity prices had fallen such that they could not get a rental, so they left it idle. So
Donna,
our municipality had to pay for.
Sorry, I am going to have to stop you there, down. Donna. Just because we've got a few other callers to get to, and I appreciate hearing the perspective from where you are. You've added a lot to the conversation, but we'll have to leave it there just so I can get to a few more people. So, Donna, thanks.
Okay, because I could write a book.
I'm sure you could. Donna, thanks. Take care. That was Donna joining us just north of Kalonze. So there are a few more people I want to get to, but Paige, do you have any final thoughts before we move on to hearing a perspective from Jeremy Welter, who farms near Kerrobert?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from Donna, and I appreciate her fear. I think what she's saying, though, in the way some of those practices are being carried out, if that's the case, they're going to fix themselves. It's a little bit like supply and demand. Sometimes it sorts itself out. If you're draining your land and we're in a drought, where are you getting your bushels from? I need water to grow a crop. If I see a farmer draining his land, I'm really questioning his practices and how long he's going to be there.
The other question that I have, and because Chad, even though he can't definitively say, because you can't always see who's on the title, but we heard some particular countries mentioned there, and Chad wasn't convinced that we're seeing that kind of foreign ownership. Donna mentioned China, Pakistan, India. Like, are we seeing that?
I think we need to be responsible residents and find the facts. right? It's just so easy. It happens all the time. There's a land transaction happening right beside us. There was 5 people that we heard bought it. None of it was true.
Right.
Right. So and we're seeing it go backwards. So, some of that land that's gone to let's call it land barons is coming back on the market because maybe it isn't as good as they thought it was. So I think sometimes it sorts itself out, but we really need to be calm, find the facts, and
ask for transparency, which I think links back to what Chad Lawley was saying, and also the provincial auditor. So I just want to bring in a different voice here. So Jeremy Welter farms near Kerrobert. He grew up on the farm, but has been farming himself since 2012. And he says that he has seen prices in his area double in that time.
When you come to the recognition that land prices have doubled in the last 12 years, well, the challenge is that productivity hasn't doubled in the last 12 years. The value certainly hasn't doubled in the last 12 years. So you begin, asking yourself the question, well, does the purchase of this land, will it justify itself over, say, a 25 or 30 year period? Am I going to be able to make this purchase make financial sense? And if the value of that land is beyond what the productive capability of that land is, over a farming career, the purchase of the land doesn't make there's not really a solid financial argument for that beyond the speculation and the hope that that land value will continue to rise exponentially. As land prices continue to rise and as that economic argument becomes harder to justify on that purchase, I think what you will see is a lot more land being owned by people that are not farming it. You'll see people who own land not being invested in the local communities. And really what I think it's going to come down to is it's kind of one of those things that sort of works as one more nail in the coffin for small local communities. They're unfortunately going to continue fighting a losing battle of attrition because there's just simply not enough people in the area invested in the success and the growth of those small communities.
Do you think that there should be changes? I mean, we've made changes in the past. Do you think that there should be changes to limit who can own land in Saskatchewan, make it only people who live in this province who can own it, or any other changes like that?
Personally, I do, and that's just my own 2 cents. I will say I certainly wouldn't go as far as to say I know what the right answer is. I don't know where you strike that balance between what is reasonable and fair for the people who want to sell the land and what's reasonable and fair for the people who are trying to purchase that land to get into it. My concern is, and why I think it's reasonable to say something we've seen happen over the last 10, 12, 15 years, we've seen one generation have the ability to enrich themselves off of an asset purchase, while the next generation coming up is finding it more and more difficult to justify that purchase, and to some extent, I think there's probably people getting permanently locked out and unable to afford that, right?
So that's Jeremy Welter. He farms near Kerrobert. He spoke to my colleague, Nicole Hack. Paige, initial thoughts after listening to Jeremy's perspective? I mean, interesting to think that he personally does think we should limit who owns land in Saskatchewan.
I don't think policy is the answer.
Why not?
I think that's a slippery slope, right? I think there's this argument that we want smaller government, not bigger government. So then the onus is on us to make the decisions and act in the values that we want to represent. So what they're missing in these conversations is that as this land price gets driven up, so does everyone's net worth and their equity. So there's
fewer people are making that kind of money.
Well, anyone who already has land, has some, has tripled or quadrupled their net worth. So we're missing that part of the conversation as well. Some of them are reluctant to let it go.
What has this done to rural communities? Even just your example of using the same number of people to farm much more land, how has that changed communities, and what is the impact of that?
The best version of Canada is a strong rural community. I think the future of our country is in creating and bringing back rural living, rural community. There's so much that the farm communities can give to the rest of the world if we can create a viable, community where there's a store and restaurants and that's all feasible. My question, I think, to our original conversation about why do you want to farm? What do you want to do? If you want to get in, do you want to pull wrenches? Do you want to drive tractors? That is available to anybody. There's such a shortage in farm labor right now. If you want to actually physically do the farm things, but it's not important to you to be on title, that is available to you in the rural community right now. You can get into a beautiful 4-bedroom home in Fillmore, Saskatchewan for $150,000, where you're paying $600,000, $800,000 in an urban center. And you could drive to my farm as an example and be part of our farming business. That's accessible to anybody.
Work the land, but
yes.
you're not owning. What happens though when rent money? If an owner lives in Alberta, like Robert Angelic, and he rents out the land, and that profit from renting the land ends up in a different province, what's the impact of that?
I would make the same argument for where we're buying our inputs. I mean, a lot of farms have decided to outsource their purchases to Chinese-made product. It's leaving the country too. So again, we are way in more control of where our dollar goes, where the impact is, if we choose to. It's going to cost us a little bit of money, right? We got to let it go. We can't nickel and dime everybody and then expect these high values. So
I want to go to another caller because we've got a few people on the line. And so Paul Emile, who is north of Nipawin, joins us on the line right now. Hi, Paul Emile.
Good afternoon. 3 quick points. Yes, land prices, around here anyway, have tripled in the last 25 years. Second point, when we moved up here from Regina in the late 70s, we were looking at the map, see if we can buy some land, and we're on the fringe of the agricultural land, and so everybody knows everybody. And I was asking these people, who are these people? This name we don't know, we don't recognize. Well, they're Americans. They're from the United States, and they had about 14 quarters. So that's a long time ago that we've been wondering about this practice, but anyway.
Which is technically not allowed, right? If I'm fully, Paul Emile, I just want to interrupt you for a second. We don't allow foreign ownership, right? Like that is just, I just want to clarify that, Paul Emile. Like
that's my understanding.
Right? Like you can be a Canadian citizen and own land in Saskatchewan, but you're technically not allowed to live in the United States or China or Pakistan or India and own land in Saskatchewan. Like we have rules, whether or not it's properly being enforced, et cetera. I don't know, but that is the rule, right, Paige?
That's what I understand.
Okay. So, Paul Emile, you're saying that Americans did own land in your area.
When I asked somebody who these people were, because they were here a lot longer, before me, they told me they were Americans. I never went to the RM and checked, because first of all, they wouldn't tell you, there's privacy laws. They told me they were Americans. Now, I don't know how they get around it. That's a whole different ballgame, and it's still going on today. My third point is, and we know these people personally, I mean, they're not close friends, but we know them. A couple came from the United States, I think to be about 25, 30 years ago. They bought a quarter of land north of us. They are Americans. They live in the United States all winter long. They come up for a few months in the summertime and do some kind of farming. They don't have equipment. They just must rent it out. And this way, and they told me personally, this way they get free health care. Because they own land, they get all their medical, especially the bigger medical expenses covered by our government. Now, this is what I've seen. This is what's around my area.
Okay. Paul Emile, thanks. Thanks for calling. Let's go to Beverly in Lashburn. Beverly, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hello. I think we haven't paid enough attention to what the monetary system really is, how it's really being used worldwide, and whether there really is a market. I have been in stores and checked, and there may be 5 or 6 different brands on the shelf. But if you check, one company is selling them all.
Paige, I want you
there's no competition at all. And
Paige?
I think the same thing is happening with the input that are needed for agriculture. there's now a monopoly system in where this stuff comes from, who owns it, before the farmer gets it. Yeah.
Okay, Beverly, I'm just going to stop you there because we're almost out of time, and I want to give Paige a chance to respond to what you just said, and then we'll have to wrap up for today. It always goes so fast. Paige, when Beverly says something like that, what are you thinking?
We get really focused on one or two farms. The buzzwords, the headlines, the things that aren't going right. I mean, like I said, there's 12,000 farms in Saskatchewan. We're getting caught up on maybe 400,000 acres. I think it's about 22 million acres of arable land in Saskatchewan. So it's such a small fraction, but that's what's owning our conversation. It's where the worry is.
Mm-hmm. And legitimate worry?
I think we just have so much more control if we do a little more research, right? And instead of getting caught up in our emotions about, another half section got sold to this farm or whatever. Maybe we're missing part of the conversation. Maybe no one wants that land, right? My big thing is education. The barrier to getting into farming is education, not finances.
And what do you mean by education?
Is understanding your balance sheet, understanding how to leverage what you already have, how to access some extra funding, how to do a transition loan that are available, right? We've seen the transition loan work. It helps us reduce the taxes that whoever we're buying from pays for, or capital gains, for example, but no one knows it exists.
Right.
So, yeah.
You need a business degree.
You do.
Or a background in accounting.
Yeah. This is not a single skill environment. You just need so much expertise to get into farming at the level that I think people are talking about.
We've only scratched the surface. I know that there was so much more to say and callers, and it's a complex issue, but at least in this 1 hour and on the podcast that we did, This is Saskatchewan, I feel like I'm slowly piecing together the story of rural Saskatchewan, and I appreciate your insight into this, Paige. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leisha.
That's Paige Stewart, who farms near Fillmore, Saskatchewan. We'll be posting this episode online, and so if you missed some of it, you can catch it on CBC Listen, but we also have this podcast where you can hear my feature conversation with Chad Lawley. The podcast is called This is Saskatchewan. It's available on Apple, Spotify, CBC Listen, whatever your favorite podcast app is, you can find it there. And then you can always get in touch with us over email if you listen at a different time, bluesky@cbc.ca.